What's up, boys? This season's Fathers of the Future podcast is brought to you by ScottsdalePodcast.com. It's the studio that I'm in right now. Here's the deal. If you have a story, if you have a mission, if you have an interview, if you have something deep and meaningful in your heart that you need to share, that you need to get out, that you need to promote, that you need to fundraise, that you need to build, let ScottsdalePodcast.com be the place that you can come. Nobody is coming to save you. It's the harsh reality and truth about society today. This is why we are bringing back our Nobody is Coming to Save You training program. Not for you, but for the women in your life, for your mom, your daughter, your wife, your girlfriend, your sister. This one-day training course will guide these untrained women how to properly assess a scenario, how to have basic firearms instruction and safety, how to have some combat training and self-defense practices, but most importantly, it's to teach them what we know as men. This program has limited availability and will fill up fast. So make sure you get the women in your life, the training, the education, the understanding, the awareness, and ultimately the empowerment to never become a victim. Welcome to the Fathers of the Future podcast. I am joined today by Stephen Kopp, who is an Army veteran and my personal gunsmith, if I can say that. I don't think I've ever said that before, but pretty cool. I have my newest weapon here, which you helped me fabricate with a silencer, and pretty cool, awesome. We are here in Arizona. I am, and I'm going to find out a little bit more about Stephen, but a believer of 2A. I got to imagine that he wouldn't be in the industry, in the business, if he wasn't himself. But we're going to dive deep into not only Valley Forge weaponry and his business and his company, but ultimately, you know, what does it mean to protect and serve in today's reality where so many things are blamed on guns. And I feel like I'm constantly having to defend not just my right to carry here in Arizona, but to speak on what I believe is truly a value in an American freedom, to be able to carry a firearm and have firearms with you and on you at all times, because it's an equalizer. And in any bad situation, as a good guy, as somebody who trains and practices and is constantly learning on how to be not just a better marksman, but to have the mental capacity to handle a situation that I don't ever want to get in. And that's something that I explain to all of my clients, is I tend to armorize a lot of people, a lot of men for the first time, and taking them to C2 Tactical to shoot and to train, or outdoors at one of our Nobody is Coming to Save You events, is the battle and the politics involved in American freedom. And so could you give us and our listeners, and we're going to talk about fatherhood too. Yeah. But if you could give the listeners just a little bit about your background and how you ultimately got into the gunsmithing business.
Yeah, so I mean, as a kid, I was kind of into guns, you know, growing up out here in Arizona, you know, kind of that Western culture. And then part of it also had to do with the military. You know, growing up watching a lot of military movies. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, you know, so listening to him talk about stuff, and then actually being in the Army, you know, obviously. So that kind of exposed me to, you know, actually get to play with the cool toys that we have, right? And then getting out, I didn't really think I was going to become a gunsmith. I still had a love for firearms. I actually ended up getting a job while I was going to college using the GI Bill as a firearm salesman at Cabela's, which was pretty chill. But then I started to realize a lot of guys were asking for a gunsmith. And I mean, we would refer some of the old timers that are still around here in town. But there was kind of like a lack of gunsmiths at the time. So I was like, you know what? Maybe this is a door for me, you know, an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I should probably capitalize on that. So I started my own thing, and we've been going strong since 2019, and I've been really enjoying it.
Yeah, so you got to be a part of the COVID boom, which I remember walking into C2 2020, and we were still doing our Crucible events and shooting in some of the simulations with Jeff Smith, and there being no guns on the shelves.
Yeah.
And, talking to people, it
was crazy,
who were working there saying, we've sold, there's 2 million guns sold, right, during COVID, but yet only 130,000 CCWs or whatever. The training did not support the gun sales.
Yeah. Yeah, the numbers are crazy. And then if you look at the numbers too, like the number of like Democrats that bought guns for the first time, or just first time gun buyers in general, you're seeing all sorts of demographics of people, literally every corner of life of people coming in. You're like, man, I never would expect this person to be buying a gun, but it just goes to show you that the fear that was happening during COVID of the unknown of what's going to happen, in the world, that people needed something to, a tool to protect themselves with, and the easiest thing to do is to go buy a gun. But as you brought up the CCW numbers, that is kind of concerning, right? You have all these people who are scared with these guns. And it's like, well, you know what, let's get you trained up on these things, especially if you're a first time buyer. There's a lot of safety things you need to understand. The gun itself just sitting there is not dangerous, but obviously when someone else comes around, you got children in the house, other family members that are not familiar with that firearm. Are you storing it safely? Is it loaded? What do you tell your children, when they see the firearm that's not locked up? These are all things people don't really think about when they go buy it,
And from your experience being in this industry during this boom, most people are buying, first-time buyers, they're starting with a handgun, and that tends to be it. Like, do you know the data or the trends of multiple guns? And here's what I'm referring to. When we moved here in 2007, I had some of my grandfather, mom's passed down old rifles that didn't shoot or work.
Yeah.
I bought my first handgun. And then within a month, I got like, welcome to Arizona. You can buy an AK-47 out of a box for a couple $100.
Right.
And I was like, well, I better go do that.
Yeah.
That's my right as an Arizonan. And I've purchased a lot more weapons since then. I have a small variety that I enjoy, including this, which is now my new dream rifle as I'm getting into competing with tactical games. But multiple guns, to me, the more I've trained, have been more useful in not only proximity, location, where I store them, where I keep them, or what their purpose is.
Yeah.
Do you know any of the statistics or numbers? Were people buying secondary weapons later? Did you see trends where people would come back and maybe add a rifle to their...
Yeah. So, I don't really know the numbers off the top of my head, but it's talking about trends. Usually the first-time gun buyer is a handgun, They just want something to either keep in their house, or they do plan on carrying it outside of the house, or maybe even in their vehicle. But yeah, typically the second firearm is usually what we call a long gun, which can include a rifle or a shotgun. Typically it's more on the rifle side. That I see. It's usually the AR-15, the most popular rifle out there. But again, when you purchase these things right off the bat, these are things you need to train with. The difference between a handgun and a rifle, they both shoot, projectiles, right? But they're going to handle differently. So you need to know how to train with each one. So it's really just a matter of I think, educating people more. And I think it has more to do with dealers too. If they know you're a first-time gun buyer, like, come on, suggest like, hey, if it's a small mom and pop shop, I would say at least suggest guys in the industry that do training and kind of push that on them. C2 Tactical, they're a large facility, so obviously they have training in-house. So that's brought up a lot there. But I think that's something people really, and I can't stress this enough, and I'm going to keep stressing it, is, first-time gun buyer, or if you're just new to guns, go get trained. You need to train. You don't just hop in a car and start driving, right? Like, you got to learn how to drive it first. You got to get licensed for it. You don't need a license for a gun here, but You got to do these things not only to protect yourself, but to protect others as well.
Absolutely. Scenarios was something that was new to me when I started to train more and more at C2, where, in a real life situation, drawing your weapon to protect or defend yourself or your family is not going to be static.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be from 50 feet away. It's close quarters, right? I think the CIA statistic is like 6 to 8 feet that most situations happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So training outdoors, right? We're in Arizona, fire ban's done October 1st. It's great to train indoors at C2 and CU, but it's also really great to do some outdoor scenarios.
Of course.
And then ultimately the mental side of it. So I'd like to hear your feedback on this. Mm-hmm. This is what I coach and teach, and I'm not a firearms instructor at all. I'm a performance coach that integrates some tactical training as well as martial arts and combat training into regular men and people just to be, dangerous enough.
Yeah.
But my scenario for most situations, even though I carry everywhere in my vehicle and on me, number one is completely stay away from the situation, avoidance.
Yep.
Right. Number two, de-escalation or using some type of...
Which is the hardest part, honestly.
That's a hard one, right? Jocko talks about that one a lot, right? And he has some iron will of emotional intelligence to do that. Number three, for me, avoidance, de-escalation is run. I've gotten my ass beat a lot in Hawaii, and running saved me from getting jumped even more.
Yeah.
Number four is fight. Mm-hmm. Number five is weapon, and knowing all things are a weapon, from keychains to belts to watches. Mm-hmm. And number six would be to draw my weapon.
Yeah.
And so that's the 6 steps in my mind when I'm anywhere.
Yeah.
Going through my head constantly, surveying, looking around at the backdrop, getting gas, driving in shady places, right?
And that's solid. That's a solid list you got there. And, a lot of guys associate things like that mentality to just like strictly in military and law enforcement applications. But honestly, as a man, as a protector, I think that should be in your head all the time, no matter what. When you're out, especially when you're out with your family, you should always be looking for threats, identifying things that can become a situation. Like, you should always be thinking about the safety of your family when you're out and about. So, and it doesn't have to do with, other guys being aggressors and stuff like that. It can be, just being in a public setting and like, if there's a fire, what do I do? Mm-hmm. If there's some sort of medical emergency, what's the plan of action? Like, these are things I think a man should be thinking of, regardless of where he's at. But no, that list is solid. And I love how you put weapons before actually drawing your weapon. Mm-hmm. So that's a brain scratcher right there, right? So it's like, when people buy a gun, they think like, okay, this is the tool I'm using. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to draw my gun and shoot. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of other things you can do. You can, it's all very situational, based, right? But, at the end of the day, you really don't want to be taking someone else's life. You know what I mean? If it comes to that point, it needs to be done, but that's the thing you want to, pretty much avoid. That's got to be the very last result. So the steps bringing you up to that is basically how you do it, right? First avoid the situation. Let's get out of here. Mm-hmm. Easiest thing you can do, right? Just get out of there.
Pick
right?
a different gas station. Pick a different parking spot.
Yeah, exactly. And then, okay, things are starting to be confrontational. They're talking to you. Their behavior is kind of erratic. Okay, let's kind of de-escalate things. Mm-hmm. Maybe the guy's having a bad day. I'm not going to shoot a guy over him having a bad day. Like, we all have bad days. Yeah. Okay. So like, try to de-escalate. And that's kind of like the humanized part, right? Where you're trying to connect with this person and really figure out what's going on. If they really lost their rocks, or if they're just, again, having a bad day. But if it goes to that next step where now they're getting handsy, now they're being really confrontational, and you got to put your hands on that person. Okay. Subdue the person, until someone calls law enforcement or someone else can help you out, right? And get this guy some help.
3-foot rule, and that's something I've always, that comes from Hawaii. And again, you can talk all the shit you want to from 3.5, but if you step within 3 feet, you're giving me the okay that you've now crossed over to the threat line.
Yep. And notice how you drew that line with physical, that was a physical thing. It wasn't him saying something nasty about your wife or your daughter or your kids or whatever, right? Like free speech, you know what I mean? The guy can talk all the smack he wants. It doesn't give you the right to deck him, you know what I mean? Until he starts, really coming at you and is really proving that he's going to be a physical threat to you and the people around you. That's, when you got to take action, right? But just the escalation or the steps you put for the weapons, I really like that because, your body's a weapon, right? So use your body first, but if need be, if again, this is all situation based, and that's why you have that list, because every situation is different, that again, you have other things on you. If you wear rings, that can be pretty nasty in a fight. If you have other objects on you that you can use before you can draw your firearm, that's nice, because again, at the end of the day, no one should die. You know what I mean? So using these steps, I think, can prevent a lot of unnecessary deaths.
Absolutely. And I've been very vocal and unafraid to share running as an escape plan, just from so many events that have happened in my life where you just start to see what's coming.
Yeah.
And maybe you're going to get jumped. Maybe someone's going to, he's going to have a weapon and you're not. And so just surveying and getting that gut instinct that tells you, right? That's why that's there.
And there's nothing unmanly about it. It's the most manly thing you can do is get home to your wife and kids safely. That's the most manly thing you can do. Not to try to prove some point to some punk and then lose your life over it.
Absolutely. How do we, as Americans, continue to fight for the Second Amendment?
Well, the First Amendment is there. So, really use the First Amendment to help protect the Second Amendment. Get really vocal, out there. Vote people out that are not friends, to the 2A community. I know it's kind of difficult here in Arizona's climate. We are kind of purple now. Which is crazy to say, but again, I think actually a lot of Democrats here aren't really, I don't think they really mind 2A stuff here, because they know we're a big 2A state, and I haven't really heard any local politicians really kind of speak against that kind of stuff. So I don't think the state of Arizona is at that point where I think we're that threatened. Now, being purple is a little threatening, right, when it comes to gun rights, but out here I don't think it's too bad. But at least on the national level, I think we need to keep speaking up. We need to keep, the fights going out in California and Massachusetts and Connecticut, all these states that have pretty restrictive gun laws, because if they can do it, your state can do it too, right? So the First Amendment is there to help protect the Second Amendment too, so...
And battling what they would call assault rifles, what we might just call long guns.
Yep.
Do you see that getting tighter and tighter the more active shooters we see and school shooters we see and, mass homicides we start to see? Because as a gun owner, as somebody who trains, as a civilian, I also know my lane in this conversation. I have... seen people call out guns. Yeah. The politics of it all, right? Ban the weapons, charge more on taxes for ammunition, do everything you possibly can to stop, right? And we know this, there are more guns than there are Americans, I believe.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
so
like a 2-to-1 ratio.
It would be hard to take them away,
right,
but they could stop future gun ownership or make it much harder to have
the ammo and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think there's gonna be one shooting that's gonna happen that's gonna just radically change everything, because we've had some nasty shootings, ever since the Sandy Hook. They've been really going after AR-15s, and it's like, if they didn't do it in 2012, I don't know if they're gonna do it now because of a shooting. there's going to be, like what you're saying, I think backdoor ways of trying to get at it, because I think they finally realize another mass shooting is not going to get the public angry enough to ban these things, right? So they're going to try to be sneaky about it and, do other things a way around it, like the magazine laws, in California, the way the gun looks and stuff like that, So I don't think we'll get to that point, at least anytime soon, in my mind.
And as a man, a human, and a father, right? Take away Gunsmith, take away your veteran background, even take away 2A for just a moment. How do we, as a society, prevent, and I'm super curious about this answer because I think I know what you're going to say, but how do we prevent bad people from doing what they continue to do with guns and weapons in this country, which we know happens more often than other countries?
Yeah.
Is there any one thing that we could do, like a mental health campaign? Do you think that would have any significance in what we see in society?
It's hard. You can't really sum it all up into one answer. Mental health, I think, has a lot to do with it. But honestly, I think right now we are in a cultural identity crisis. And it has its fingers in everything, which includes mental health, right? It also boils down to really just the family structure that we have. But that all this stuff can really get you so far, because if you look at the Charlie Kirk situation, the kid seemed like he was in a decent household, at least from what I know, right? Or from what the media has been putting out. I mean, the guy's father worked for like the sheriff's department for like 20 years or something like that. And I think the mother worked for like some disability, whatever. So, I mean, it seemed like it was a decent, household. But again, I don't know what the mental health was. I don't know how his childhood was, his upbringing. I don't know if he was truly influenced through social media, all these. So I don't think there's really one answer. The only one answer I think that kind of sums everything up is the cultural identity crisis that we're having right now, which has to do with, again, like I'm repeating myself, with the family. And that's kind of where it starts, is with the family.
Well, to build on just the family, but the fatherhood dynamic, we know that too, right? Yeah. I saw a statistic once from being in, the fatherhood space of coaching and training, 96% of men in prison, men that caused murder, rape, all had either a broken family or, fatherlessness in their upbringing. Sexual assault, whatever that might be, like it's been magnified. And so that to me is even harder than solving mental health issues.
Yeah.
Right? How do you solve
a family issue,
Yeah.
Because a mental health issue, the government can step in and be like, okay, we're going to start bringing up institutions, you know what I mean? But how does the government really help a family? You know what I mean? And, you could really say it's a fatherless issue, but, when the father is out of the family, you still have the rest of the family to kind of help step in and help, the kid out. If you have a large enough family, right? So I was fortunate, some information about me. So I actually was raised without a father, which is great. I don't think anyone would have guessed that, today, but I had other men in my life.
Zero? Like he never...
First time I saw my father, I was 11 years old, and we went to prison to go see him. Yeah, so he's been in jail basically his whole life, right? So never really was around, never really had influence on me. But I had people like my grandfather. I had a couple uncles. Joining the Army, I had a lot of strong male figures, in the Army that I looked up to. So, I could say fathers not being there, is an issue and stuff, but it's,
positive male role model you had, which substituted the dad role.
Yeah. So several male figures in my life kind of just, filled that role. And I was very fortunate to have that. And I think some people, who are without a father, they don't have that support system. And those are kind of the guys that I think fall through the cracks. So I was fortunate to have other men in my life to kind of help fill that role and teach me things. But it's the guys that don't have anyone else to turn to that kind of slip through the cracks. And those are the guys you kind of worry about,
Knowing that part of your story now, are you more aware as a father with a 5-year-old daughter, that your style, that how and who you are as a father came from your dad not being around, or from the men who substituted your dad not being around? What's the greater influence and impact on your own fatherhood journey?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's more of not having a father around and just me wanting to prove to myself, like, I can figure this out. I've had other guys, show me what it's like to be a man and how to be a man. And I think I can kind of figure this out for myself. And honestly, to me, being a father is a no-brainer. Like, it's like, just love your child, man. Love your kid. It's not that hard. I get it. You have to change your life, right? Because now you have this responsibility in front of you. But to me, in my eyes, being a father is not that hard. You just love the crap out of your kid, man. Make him a good person.
That's beautiful. I don't think it's quite been said like that on this show before. We talk about lead with love as a core pillar of fathers of the future, but love on them hard.
Yeah.
Show up is on the back of my license plate, and that to me is the first step. And very similar to your story. My dad was in and out of prison. I call him a phantom, not a ghost. And he, said he was coming to visit when he got out and never did, and that happened twice. And after that, I had just given up.
Yeah.
And then come to find out, just last September, he actually died at 84.
Oh, wow.
And we had, hired private investigators, searched to try to find him. And so those wounds were very present my entire life until last September. I felt like that was the final, part of the scar tissue that closed. But I not only teach it, I lived it to be able to not pass that on to my own kids. And so like you, it's very easy leadership in terms of raising kids, good, healthy kids. Regardless of what the relationship may be like with mom, the dad can still have his impact and influence on the family. And I don't think enough men realize that. And so they just jump ship.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem, right? That we see in society, especially in America. Those numbers are so high where dad's just he's not there.
Yeah. And I can't wrap my head around that. I just don't get it. I don't know if it's just people just being selfish, I can't imagine people just, saying it's too much for them. I think it's more of just, people being selfish and they don't want to put the work in.
What happens when somebody says, "Oh, I don't know how, it's not in my DNA as a man"?
I think that those are just excuses you're making for yourself. It's, again, it could boil down to maybe they just don't have love. Maybe they're not loved, or they've never been loved, so they don't know how to project that. It's hard to put my head into their head. Because as soon as my daughter was born, God, there was so much love, man. And I can't understand. I can't fathom other guys who don't have that for their kids. Like, that love is so strong that it just makes you want to be a good person, makes you want to be a good dad. Even if you're not, confident and you don't have the skills, like, none of us have been fathers until we have our first kid, right? So we don't really truly know how we're going to be. But the love is just so overpowering that I feel like the love is actually guiding me into becoming a good father,
And you're a girl dad right out the gate. My girl was second to my son. I know Martin has 2 girls. For men, and let's call them masculine men, real men, it adds a layer of not quite softness or even kindness, but like another layer of love that had I had a second dude like my dude, I never would have experienced.
Yeah.
There is more care, there is more nurturing, there's more patience with her than with him.
Yeah.
And seeing that now at 17, turning 18, right? Like, I am constantly finding ways to keep connected to her, knowing what everybody says, right? You are the version of the man that she knows first.
Yeah. Well, you also got to remember, you are her first love. You know what I mean? Obviously, it's a different kind of love. It's a father-daughter love, but she's going to experience her first, male love is her father. You know what I mean? So that's something very special that you're going to have, you know, with this person. And the way you go about this love is the way she's going to view love for the rest of her life, you know, towards men, right? So it's a little bit of pressure on you, right? To show her, like, kind of be the example of, like, look, if you're going to look for another man, which there's going to be another man in your life, I got to be at least the standard. You know what I mean? Yeah. I want you to find a guy better than me. Yeah. Well, maybe not better. Well, yeah. No, I want you to find a guy, you know, who's going to treat you right, you know, who's better than me in aspects, right? But, you know, I got to at least set the standard of, like, look, this is kind of what you need to be looking for. Anything less than this, I mean, I love you to death, baby girl, but, you know, like, you got to find yourself a strong man, you know.
These are the standards that I've set.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about weapons again.
Yeah.
What is the number one service and or weapon you are working on, right? What is the most common handgun that you see, firearm, in your shop? And what do you recommend? So I carried a Glock 19 as my first EDC for 4 or 5 years with an iron sight. And then I, you know, upgraded to Echelon with a dot. Yeah. And so a little more accurate, a little more comfortable, more capacity. And I think I'm ready to now upgrade again. Yeah. Right. So not me, but what would you say would be like the entry level, and for a guy, right? So we're not looking at super concealed carry, but.
I mean, so going back to setting the standard, right? Yeah. So Glock. That's the standard. That's the standard of the gun industry. You know, that's kind of the default. I recommend new shooters to try out Glocks. A first purchase, a Glock is not a bad, you know, bet. So Glock is pretty much the standard. They do have different variations of their handguns. You know, they got different calibers, different sizes, stuff like that. But the most reliable firearm is the Glock. Like, if you walk into C2 Tactical right now, and if you take a look at the guns that are missing on the shelves, the ones that are down, they're not Glocks. All the Glocks are full. You know, they're 2 rows of Glocks full. Other brands, maybe not so much, right? So Glocks are very dependable. They're very easy to maintain. They can be taken apart fairly simply. So Glock is usually the standard. Now, if I'm going to say something other than Glock, honestly, just sticking to your major brands, your Smith & Wesson, your Springfield, you know, Walther, HK, guys like that. You know, solid. You know, I usually tell people, if you want a solid handgun, usually over $500 is kind of what you're looking to spend. Anything less than that, that's kind of fun to have, but don't know if I trust my life on it, you know.
Yeah, I got a Kel-Tec maybe last summer. It was a cheap foldable 9mm that took the same magazines as my Glock.
Which is cool, yeah.
But it malfunctions a lot.
Yeah. So it's cool to have, but I'm not going to trust my life on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What would you say the number one weapon is that you are working on fixing to stay away from? And are you allowed to say that?
God, I hate to say it. No, I'm not sponsored, but I hate to say it because I actually really love this company. So, honestly, man, SIGs. I love SIGs to death. I have SIGs, but they just keep disappointing me, you know, time after time. And I've always been a supporter of them. I still have a pretty strong opinion about the whole 320 situation, about them going off. You know, I still think the 320 is a pretty safe firearm. But I do think SIG is handling the situation horribly. Absolutely.
Could you share that? Because I've heard that a little bit. I got a chance to go out to Austin last month. I think I shared with you and train at Sheepdog Tactical with Tim Kennedy's group. And I love going out there. I love training here as well. But they've just been, you know, world class when it comes to their training. And they talked a little bit about that, one of the instructors, that this firearm had actually gone off.
Yeah, so it's a design issue is what it boils down to, and SIG knows it. They know it's a weak point. They don't want to fix it, either because it's going to be too expensive, or they just don't want to admit fault, you know, at anything. Again, if you look at the numbers, it is still a fairly safe firearm, because there's so many out there, and just the number of instances that are, you know, happening, it's extremely low. So the likelihood that your 320 is just going to go off is pretty low.
How often has a firearm actually gone off on its own prior to this?
That's interesting you say that too, because no one really started saying anything until the report came out that, hey, if you drop this, it goes off, right? And that was during the Army testing, and it had to be at like 8 feet. It had to be on the backside at a certain angle, and the gun would go off because the inertia of the trigger would actually move back far enough to allow the striker to release, and it would go off. And then ever since then, all of a sudden people are like, hey, my 320 is going off. My 320 is going off. So I don't know if it just started to become, into the spotlight, or if there was a lot of accusations of actual negligent discharges happening, and people just kind of use it as a cover-up, like, oh, well, it was a SIG 320, so it must have been the gun.
So excuse my lack of understanding.
Yeah.
Let me just get clear for a second. These firearms did not go off on their own. They were dropped. And because of that, they went off.
That was the initial stuff. And then it started coming out that people were saying, well, when I holster it, it was going off. So then you started having holstering issues, which a lot of NDs happen around holstering and unholstering. And if you look at the numbers, I want to say it was like almost about half of the cases that were being filed were just guys NDing. Wasn't actually mechanically, the firearms going off. But, I mean, I don't really want to get into the specifics of the design, but there is an issue with the striker safety and whatnot that I think SIG should be fixing. Because in this very, very few cases that the firearm is going off by itself, I think it is a fixable thing that SIG can be doing, but they're just not doing it.
Yeah. Thank you for that, because people do ask that a lot, right? Every handgun I've carried, there is no safety intentionally, and I've explained that as I've taught some people. For their first firearm, you might want to start with something with a safety. The safety for me is here, not on the weapon itself.
Yeah. Safety. I mean, you're the safety, right? And when you say safety, you're talking in a traditional sense of a thumb safety. So most modern firearms do have safeties. They're what they call them, like internal safeties. So the gun just sitting there, if you bang on it, not a 320, but if you bang on it, it shouldn't go off, right? Unless you actually pull the trigger, because the internals have things blocking the firing pin from just going. It's not like if it slips off the sear, there's another piece in the slide, usually called like the firing pin block or safety or something like that, that stops it from going forward. The only time that piece moves out of the way is if you pull the trigger, because when you pull the trigger, it pushes up on that piece to allow the firing pin or striker to have a clear path, right? So those are like internal safeties, and pretty much every firearm has that kind of feature on it. But the thumb safety, the one on the outside, that one typically blocks like the hammer or the sear or something like that. So there's still something there that's blocking it from moving. And people kind of like that peace of mind to kind of have that switch, on there to click, off. But again, finger placement, right? You don't want to have your finger on the trigger when you're, switching off the safety too, right? So that was an issue with cops carrying 1911s back in the day because they had that thumb safety on there, and they would ride the trigger while they're flicking off the safety, and, they'd ND. So, I mean, actually having an external safety can also be dangerous too, you know what I mean? But it boils down to training and knowing your firearm, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Valley Forged. And you're in North Scottsdale, right? Great demographic for a lot of guys who don't know how to service and clean their weapons. But you're also doing, at least what I found out, right? I've come in there with a few newbies before, and, they don't understand the basics of it. I took this weapon to you to do some custom fabrication. But at the same time, I realized I didn't know how to disassemble my handgun and clean it. And so I went through YouTube University to do that. And you've done some laser cleaning before, right? High level. But talk to us just a little bit about some of the work that you do. And for the listeners out there, what they can expect. To me, this is the most modernized technical weapon that I have. And so I didn't want to, pretend like I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
I brought it straight to you with my suppressor.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, help me out. And you've custom fabricated it to fit the right way, because it is a machine.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, I think we had to grind something down, right? Because it wasn't fitting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a Q, right? So I mean, they're not exactly cheap firearms. So I would say they're probably on the higher end, right? So they're pretty upper level, tier firearms. So I can understand being nervous about taking it apart, and you don't want to put a big old fat scratch in there, right?
And plus, I had never shot my own suppressor before. And so, not knowing what to expect, you comforted me, but you also, hooked it up. So I was able to shoot it. And now, from shooting, for years, it's the most fun, exciting, coolest thing I have in my arsenal.
Yeah.
And I've got a tactical games competition here in Phoenix in 2 weeks. So I'm looking forward to actually, using it in that event. Mm-hmm. But the custom work that you do, the builds, the accessories, the add-ons, all of that.
Yeah. So, So my gunsmithing business, Valley Forge Weaponry, I like to call it light gunsmithing because I don't have the machines. So I don't really do any like super high end like custom rifles or shotguns, stuff like that. So I kind of do more on the basic side. So more on like just kind of user level stuff. So people who are like, hey, I need some new sights put in, I need some triggers, put in my rifles and stuff like that. Pretty much things that I can do with hand tools. I can custom fabricate, parts if I need to make them fit. But typically you need more machines for that kind of more in-depth work. But the biggest thing I do is cleanings. Mm-hmm. Cleanings. And, some customers are like, man, people actually pay you to clean their gun. I'm like, well, I mean, do you clean your car? Do you mow your lawn? Like people hire people to do all sorts of things, right? It's just a service. It's either, people don't have the time to do it. Right? They just don't know how to do it, or they just want a professional to go through their firearm and do it right, and take a look at things and be like, hey, this is wearing out, by the way, and just kind of get a professional set of eyes on it. So I mean, there's many reasons why people use my service.
Plus sighting, like when you clean and sight at the same time, I think that's priceless.
Yeah.
Right. To not only get a full laser cleaning, but also get sighted. For me, I think it's time for a new dot, or a new weapon and a new dot. But at the same time, like, it comes loose, and when it comes loose, it's off. Mm-hmm. And so I saw how quickly and efficiently you were able to resight.
Bore sighter, yeah. The bore sighter, that's an awesome tool. The laser I put on there, and it shows you exactly where the gun's pointing, so you just kind of tune in there. And for the most part, at least for handguns, it's pretty close. Once you're on the range, you got to make maybe some minor adjustments. With the rifles, they get you pretty good on paper at 100 yards, so you're not dropping a box of ammo trying to figure out, where your shots are landing. So, no, that's an extremely useful tool that I have in the shop, and I utilize it a lot. Yeah.
Valley Forged Weaponry inside of C2 Tactical in North Scottsdale.
Yep.
What do you want your daughter to know about you at 5 years of age, right? She just knows you're her superhero, but as she gets older, right? What would you like that part of your life and your legacy to be as it unfolds in the next 10 to 13 years?
Honestly, I just hope she sees me as a good father. That's all I really care about. I mean, she's going to have her own view of me of, like my military career and the gunsmithing and, how I'm going to treat her mother and stuff like that. But honestly, I just hope she sees me as a good father in the long run. That's really all I care about.
Simple, beautiful, clear. Mm-hmm. Stephen Kopp, number one, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
We truly appreciate you. Number two, thank you for your wisdom and knowledge, especially in the space of weaponry and understanding not just how to keep it sharp and upgraded in the toppest shape possible, but keep it as a safe and effective tool. Mm-hmm. And we truly appreciate you for being here on the Fathers of the Future podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
If you got something good out of this, all we ask is that you simply pay it forward. If you want to learn more about Stephen, you can check out his Instagram at Valley Forged Weaponry, or you can go and visit him at C2 Tactical in North Scottsdale. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Peace. So check out ScottsdalePodcast.com and reach out to my man Martin to build your podcast now.